I don't often mention my brother, Jonathan, who was killed by Al-Qaeda affiliate in Bali in 2002. It prompted my personal interest in Afghanistan, a distant country I would visit a dozen times over the last 2 decades, to better understand what we were doing to help rebuild this troubled country. And I pay tribute to our armed forces for what they did and what the Defense Secretary and the armed forces are doing today in the evacuation. So it's with utter disbelief seeing us make such an operational and strategic blunder by retreating at this time. A decision that's already triggering a humanitarian disaster, a migrant crisis not seen since the Second World War, and a cultural change in rights to women, and once again, turning Afghanistan into a breeding ground for terrorism. I'm sorry there's no vote here today, because I believe the government would not have the support of the House. The Prime Minister is not in his place, but he says the future of Afghanistan is not written. Well, the future is very much more unpredictable because of our actions. And do not believe for a second that this will be a peaceful transition to the Taliban. It's not universally liked in the country. The Uzbeks and Tajiks warlords are regrouping as we speak. The Northern Alliance will reform once again, and a bloody, terrible civil war will unfold. I will.
Does he have any advice for the government on how it could take action to try and prevent the recurrence of a terrorist threat under Taliban control?
Well, this is my fear, that there will be an attack on the likes of 9/11 to bookend what happened 20 years ago, to show the futility of 20 years. We should never have left, and I'll come on to that in a second. Because after 20 years of effort, this is a humiliating strategic defeat for the West. The Taliban now control more of the territory today than they did before 9/11. Now, I was born in the United States. I'm a proud dual national. I'm passionate about the Transatlantic Security Alliance. And prior to declaring his candidacy, I worked directly with President Biden on veterans' mental health issues. He was the keynote speaker at a veterans' reception here in the House of Commons as my guest. So it gives me no joy to criticize the President and say the decision to withdraw, which he inherited but then chose to endorse, was absolutely the wrong call. Yes, 2 decades is a long time. It's been a testing chapter for Afghanistan. So the US election promise to return troops was obviously a popular one, but it was a false narrative. Firstly, the notion that we gave the Afghans every opportunity over 20 years to progress, and the country can't be held forever, so it's time to come home. That glosses over the hurdles, the own goals that we created after the invasion. We denied the Taliban a seat at the table back in 2001. They asked to attend the Bonn talks, but Donald Rumsfeld said no. So they crossed to the Pakistan border to rearm and regroup and retrain. How different the last 2 decades would have been had they been included. And secondly, the Afghan forces themselves. We didn't start training the Afghan forces until 2005, by which time the Taliban were already on the advance. And then finally, we imposed a Western model of governance, completely inappropriate for Afghanistan, where all the power was in Kabul. Completely wrong for a country where loyalty is on a tribal and local level. This is not to dismiss the mass corruption, the cronyism and the elitism that is rife across Afghanistan. But these schoolboy errors in stabilization hampered progress and made our mission harder. There's also the notion that we can't fight a war forever. We've not been fighting for the last 3 years. The US and the UK have not lost a single soldier. But we had a minimalist force there, enough assistance to give the Afghan forces the ability to contain the Taliban and, by extension, legitimacy to the Afghan government. The US have more personnel based in its embassy here than it had troops in Afghanistan before retreating. But both the US and the UK have long-term commitments across the world, which we forget about. Japan, Germany, Korea has already been mentioned. Djibouti, Niger, Jordan, Iraq, ourselves in Cyprus, and Kenya, for example, the Falklands too. It's the endurance that counts. Success is not rated on when you return troops home. This presence offers assurance, it represents commitment, it bolsters regional stability, and it assists with building and strengthening the armed forces. This is exactly what we were doing in Afghanistan. And last year, the Taliban were finally at the negotiation table in Doha. But in a rush to get a result, Trump struck a deal with the Taliban, by the way, without the inclusion of the Afghan government, and committed a timetable for drawdown, and all the Taliban had to do was wait. And the final question about whether the UK can lead or participate in a coalition without the US, well, where is our foreign policy determined? Here or in Washington? Our government should have more confidence in itself. Very briefly.
I'm grateful to the honourable member, and he's making perfectly reasonable and justified criticisms of the way the American government have come to the decision to leave in such haste. But like a number of other honourable and right honourable members, the implication of his speech is somehow we could have had an independent Afghan policy without the Americans. Can he explain how?
Well, firstly, the Americans are not leaving Afghanistan. This is a complete myth. The CIA will remain there, as will special forces and the drone oversight as well. Why? Because they'll be haunted by another terrorist attack. It's the political inclination, it's the leadership that is disappearing because of an American president or two American presidents. And that's where we could have stepped forward and filled the vacuum, but we didn't. We need to have more confidence as a government in ourselves, as we did, in fact, in the last century. Illustrated, I thought this was what was in our DNA. We have the means, the hard power, the connections to lead. What we require is the backbone, the courage, the leadership to step forward. Yet when our moment comes, such as this, we are found wanting. We have some serious questions to ask about our place in the world, what global Britain really means, and what our foreign policy is all about. We must raise our game. Why? Step back. We seem to be in denial about where the world is going. As I've said in this House many times, threats are increasing. Democracy across the globe is under threat. Authoritarianism is on the rise, and yet here we are complicit in allowing another dictatorship to form as we become more isolationist. Tell me, what was the G7 summit all about? A Western reset to tackle growing instability, not least China, Russia, and Iran? Take a look at the map. Where does Afghanistan sit? Right between all three. Strategically, a useful country to stay close to. Now we've abandoned it, and the Afghan people as well. Shame on us. I hope the government thinks long and hard about our place in a fast-changing world. Bigger challenges, bigger threats loom over the horizon. We are currently woefully unprepared and uncommitted. We, the UK and the West, have so many lessons to be learned. I repeat my call for an independent inquiry. We must learn these lessons quickly. The West is today a little more weaker and the world a little more dangerous because we gave up on Afghanistan.